Welcome to An Honorable Profession, a podcast giving America hope since 2018. I'm Ryan Coonerty. Along with Debbie Cox Bolton of the New Deal, I'm lucky enough to be your co-host. An Honorable Profession is a New Deal Leaders podcast. The New Deal is an organization that supports the next generation of American leaders. From attorneys generals to state senators to mayors to school board members, these are the people that are pushing policies and politics that will respond to climate change, rebuild our economy, address racial injustice, and restore our democracy. These are incredibly talented people who have dedicated themselves to public service when their country and their communities needed it the most. Check out newdealleaders.org to see what I'm talking about. Oregon Representative and candidate for Congress, Janelle Bynum, welcome to An Honorable Profession.
Thank you for having me.
So we are here at the annual conference for New Deal, where you just won an award for leveraging the CHIPS Act to build a STEM workforce. Tell us about your efforts and why other states and localities should be looking at it.
Well, sure. I remember right after September 11th, my job changed. I was an engineer in Michigan, and I actually was headed over to Taiwan. And September 11th happened while I was there. I was stuck there a week and came back, and my husband and I looked at each other, and we were like, yeah, this is probably the end of life as we know it in a normal sense. And so we were pregnant with our first child, and we decided that we would go to either one of our hometowns to kind of make our new life together. And so we chose Portland, Oregon. We chose Portland because D.C. was very expensive. We didn't know that we would get good jobs here in the way that we wanted to live. And so when we got to Portland, I knew that Portland was considered, or Oregon was considered, the Silicon Forest. Silicon Forest. But when I got there, it had all burned down, basically. All of the tech companies were packing up and moving back to Asia. And so this experience that I had was, I was a young woman. I had an MBA from Michigan. I had an electrical engineering degree from Florida A&M University, and I had experience. I was very marketable, or so I thought. But the jobs weren't there. And so I was this kid who had come back home to my husband's hometown, and there was nothing waiting for me. And that to me was So I heard about, the investments that President Biden and Senator Wyden were making with the CHIPS Act. And I said that the experience that I had coming home to Oregon was not an experience I ever wanted another kid to repeat. So I dug in and wanted to make sure that we had good paying jobs across the economic spectrum. So you didn't need a college degree, but if you had one, great. And I wanted to make sure that we were being recession proof in Oregon, and we were thinking more than our two-year biennium for our budget. And so that is how I got knee deep into STEM work with the CHIPS Act.
And what do you hope to see, what's success look like in a couple years as that money continues to flow into your state?
So number one, the integration of the focus of building trades and making sure that our kids are coming out with apprenticeships. I took a group of kids over to Analog Devices for a tour a couple of weeks ago. And we were looking at, the clean rooms and all of the machinery there. And these were, pre-engineering track kind of kids. And I walked past some of the building trades guys who were installing some new equipment, and just chatted with them for a minute. And they said, hey, just let them know we're putting, pipes together with rubber cement for $130K a year. And I was like, okay. So I hope, and so far what the estimates are that the basically $300 million or so that we put in with respect to tax credits and direct investments with companies, or matching investments with companies, has yielded $43 billion in estimated investment for the state and 6,000 jobs. That.
That's a big number for
little old Oregon.
Yeah.
That's huge.
That is enormous. You've been, I've admired your work for a while now, and you're a clear advocate for opportunity.
Yes.
Can you talk about how that has played in your life, and then how you hope to bring it to your state and now to Congress?
Yeah, so I'm a kid whose parents came from South Carolina up to Washington, D.C. through the Great Migration. And as people were migrating out of the South, there were certain truths. My mother went to basically the last year of segregated high school in 1970, where the school board told her parents, you have the choice between the integrated school and the Negro school to finish your education. And she chose the Negro school, but she was the valedictorian, but she did not have a plan once she graduated. There was no plan for her to go to college, go to trade school, nothing. And so that to me, so she ended up being a teacher. That to me was just indicative of the fact that there are plenty of rural kids, plenty of, black and brown kids, immigrant kids for whom their experience ending high school shows us that there is talent but no opportunity. And to me, as a legislator, as a politician, my goal is to bridge that gap between talent and opportunity. And that it's not based on race. It's not based on, what your political affiliation is. It's just purely harnessing the educational power and the talent that we have in our country that hasn't been unleashed yet.
And you come from a small business background and have been a strong advocate for small business. Can you talk about the role that plays, both, again, in your life, but also in your policy making?
Yeah, so I kind of fell into small business. So we moved to Oregon because my husband's mom, she was the first African-American McDonald's owner in Oregon, and she said she was retiring. She hasn't yet. And so my husband was going to go work in that field while I made the real money, because there wasn't a whole lot of money in that. But I never got the job, right? I never got that job. So I ended up going to work with my in-laws. And what I saw was the impact of access to capital. We were expected to make investments in the restaurants, but you actually had to have money. How much that capital cost was also very interesting. We were afforded really good opportunities because we were part of a larger system, that we were able to get loans for much cheaper than, say, I don't know, McDonald's versus Quiznos. Quiznos is out now, but it was very expensive. And so we were also seeing, so once I'm in the business, we were also seeing where students were coming to our restaurants to work, but they didn't have the skills that they needed. So we were having to backfill in that way. And then all of the other little costs that government was passing on to small businesses, thinking that we could always absorb them, that to me said that we actually need a voice in the legislature, in Congress, to talk about what Main Street is feeling.
And tell me about that journey. So you're running a business. It's going well. It's not easy, but it's going well. You're playing roles in your state, in your region, nationally, on advisory boards and working with people. What makes you run for office? And tell me about that first campaign.
Ooh, the first campaign was interesting. My mother, I asked my mom, it was an open seat, and I asked my mom, hey, somebody mentioned I should run for this. What do you think? And she said, if your generation doesn't stand up, all of the gains that my generation made will be lost. And she was pretty doomsday about it. But she turned out to be right. Like, from her perspective, when she was, coming up, women didn't have access to birth control in the way that my generation did. And now we're seeing that my daughters don't have that same access to a full spectrum of reproductive health care choices. When you think about civil rights, rollbacks. When you think about voting rights, rollbacks. All of those things that she, in her experience in South Carolina, growing up in Horry County and Nixonville, she was very scared of that. So for me, that meant, okay, I protested. I was like, I have 4 kids. We're working in the stores. Like, we're trying to get some momentum. Like, I'm doing everything I can. And she said, no, you're not. So that first run was about, my theme has always been, my slogan has been passing opportunity on. So my parents were public school teachers. They passed it on to me, and I was able to become an engineer. And then whatever my children decide to become, they know that we stand firmly behind them, and that they have the opportunity to do anything that they want and pursue their dreams.
How do you balance the campaigning? Oregon's a part-time legislature, at
Sort
least
of.
at least in theory. Running a business, 4 kids. People listening may say, like, how does she do it? And is there any way, like, that could be a big barrier for a lot of folks?
Well, first of all, I have a great husband who is, he says I didn't ask him. I did ask him if it was okay if I could run. He said I told him. But I have a great partner, right? Like that, and my family's bought in. They get annoyed by the late nights. But I'll tell you, the one thing that has saved me is technology that I swear by, and it's Google Calendar. And so what I've done is tried to reduce the amount of uncertainty, just like in business. When you reduce the risk, when you reduce the amount of uncertainty that your family feels about your schedule, they can deal with it. And I've brought them along where I could, and I've said no to things that were, really good opportunities, but I wanted to prioritize my kids. So.
Yeah, I mean, you have to make tough choices when you're trying to balance all these things. So speaking of, when you go into the legislature, there's an endless array of issues that you're going to have to vote on, and some that you can champion. What are some of the things beyond the CHIPS Act and STEM that you're proud of, the work you've done?
Yeah, so one that's like near and dear to my heart is the Crown Act, and it stands for creating an open world, creating somebody's open world for natural hair. And that, it turns out, there's an economic interest in that. So in particular, the African American community, women and men were having a hard time going to work or showing up to like a medical school interview without wearing a wig or not being able to wear their hair braided, or just the way we naturally wear our hair. So that one was kind of personal. I guess shifting a little bit, we wrote 23 police accountability bills during the height of the George Floyd era, and they were bipartisan. And so I'm really, really proud of that work. And then one other bill that I'm pretty proud of is called Unlawful Summoning. And that one came out of an experience I had where I was canvassing, and a woman, one of my constituents, called the police on me. She was suspicious of me. And so, I think in this position, one thing I've gotten better at is having a lot of grace for people and just meeting them where they are. But I also had to explain to the community that was, you calling the police on me could have ended my life. If I had made one mistake, they would have had justification to kill me. Or if my son had been with me, my oldest son, something might have happened to him. So we wrote this bill that said you just can't utilize state or county or city resources willy-nilly to advance your own biases. And the argument was twofold. For the Democrats, it was like a civil rights issue. For my Republican friends, it was utilization of resources. And so that's how we were able to get the bill passed almost unanimously. I was short one vote. So those are the things I'm really proud of.
How, I guess, just on a personal level, right? Like you're out, as we said, you have a business, you have family, you're out trying to serve your community. Part-time legislature is not a way to get rich.
No.
Get paid virtually nothing. Probably lose money in gas after you pay for gas, and you're having the police called on you. That's hard. It's hard to hear. I can't even imagine what it's like to experience.
Well, I would just say it's a facet of daily life for many people. And I knew that my number would get called one day. I was very prepared for that. But the better number to have called was when my brother, who, you always have family members that keep you honest. My brother called one day and he was like, Janelle, oh my God, you're on World Star. You made it. And World Star is like this kind of hip-hoppy social media site that it's kind of edgy. It's not my genre, but it is. And it's very raw, and it exposes the things that are happening in the Black community, and people talk about it. And so all of a sudden my street cred went up. Like I was invited to the picnic at that point, the cookout. So I just, as long as I am safe, ultimately, and I can look at an experience and I can see where someone else has endured some pain, and we can turn that into legislation to kind of change that or educate people. I'm okay with that. Like, you have to be able, and this is like my husband, what he loves about me and what challenges him. I am really focused. Like, he says, I don't see anything else. Well, that's his job. But I'm really focused on keeping the main thing. And in writing legislation and thinking about bills that people actually need, I believe that once you become too emotional about a bill, you're no longer objective. But if you keep the main thing, you can pass the bill. And if you tell different stories and meet people where they are, you can pass the bill, and you can be a much more effective legislator.
Let's talk about meeting people where they are, because you said that these bills have passed with bipartisan support, as well as your other bills have. Oregon is as partisan divided as most of the country is. How did you find that support, and what makes you committed? There's a lot of Democrats in Oregon. You probably don't have to work with the Republicans. Why and how do you?
I think that experience with my mom, going back to the fact that, she was a rural kid, the experiences are very different. Like, people's in rural Oregon, which is where most of my Republican colleagues come from, they want the same things for their families. They want safety and security in their home. They come about it different ways. They can't pick up the phone and call the police, like especially in domestic violence situations. There's nobody coming, right? When you think about education, those people, they once had the mills that they could count on for a good, solid post-high school job. They can't count on that anymore. So when you think about how you want to sit down at your Thanksgiving table and you want all of your kids to come over, that rural family wants the same thing. But if their kids have to go away and never come back, that's heartbreaking for a parent. So I try to put myself in the shoes of what does a person really want, and how are they articulating it? Are they articulating it from a place of power or a place of pain? And that distinguishes how you write the bill and how you set the stage and how you draw other people in to join you on the bill. So that's how I divide it up.
I think there's a lot of wisdom in that, especially in public office. There were times when I served in the city and the county, and people were yelling at me, and I come home, I'm like, that's not fair, they're yelling at you. And I'm like, well, I have power and they have pain, and sometimes my job is just to absorb that, even if it's not my fault, even if it's not maybe not even anything I can do about it. But it's a dynamic that people are responding to.
Well, you bring up something really interesting. I had a staff member tell me, and this was right around the pandemic, so maybe March, April, let's say April, May of 2020. My staff member said, Rep. Bynum, I think you should go get counseling. I was like, okay. And he was like, I don't think you're crazy or anything, but he says, you're taking in a lot of people's trauma, and you need to be able to deal with it in a way that is effective and keeps you effective. And I followed his advice, and it was very helpful because we ended up writing a package of $70-80 million for mental health supports for rural and underrepresented communities. And so it was that experience of understanding how you access mental health and how you as a legislator can understand what people in rural communities and underrepresented communities are experiencing. So from that, yes, we got $80 million for that package. And then just recently when I went to Redmond, Oregon, a city councilor told me this isn't the place to have a baby and it's not the place to have a mental breakdown because there were no providers. And so that told me, okay, we still need to do more work getting mental health providers into our communities, and I still need to make sure that I take care of myself so that I can be my very best for the community.
One might ask then, the decision to go to Washington, D.C., which
God,
is as dysfunctional and angry as probably anywhere right now.
Oh my gosh, okay.
And running, a congressional race is big, and it's a big district, and it's hard. Tell me about that decision and why you think some of the trade-offs will be worth it.
So, people have asked me, like, why would you go into that dumpster fire? And, I've never been a first responder in that way, but I think, there are people who are running away from the building, and then there are people who are going in. And I think about September 11th. There were heroes that went in because their mission was to save lives. I think equally important, kind of going back to my mother kind of chiding me to say good people should serve. I believe that I'm a good person. And my constituents have, elected me over and over again. So I believe I can say that with confidence. And then I would say that the current person the incumbent in office right now, from what I can see, is an enabler of the politics that are not serving our country. We are an ally to Israel, who's in a war right now. We have geopolitical movements with China and Russia that challenge our sovereignty, that challenge our national defense, that challenge our politics and the truth of our politics. We have all of these things going on. We have people that we are stepping over in the streets that do not have housing. We have eggs that are too expensive. All of these things are problems that our legislatures and our Congress should be working on. They're up there challenging each other to duels and kidney bumping people like schoolyard bullies. I don't think we should stand around idly and say that that's okay and rubber stamp that. That's not going to get our kids the jobs they need when they're graduating high school after we've, invested over $100,000 in our kids.
Yeah.
So.
So you're not going to come in with a kidney shot strategy. You're coming in.
No, I throw elbows. Don't get me wrong. And I think my daughter's access to reproductive health care, especially if they serve in the military, is something worth fighting for and protecting. Right? So I will throw figurative elbows. I'm not body bumping anybody. No, but then I might be on World Star.
Yeah. Might be back
I don't want to be on World Star a second time for body bumping people.
Last question I got to ask. I went to the University of Oregon. Your son is a running back at the University of Oregon on their what I think is the best football team in the country.
Yeah.
You fought for student athletes.
Yes.
Tell us about the experience of being a duck mom, and then also how you can fight for student athletes.
Oh my gosh, I love that question. So I would say, I fought for high school student athletes in the beginning, where we talked about their experience in the locker room, the experience on the field, and their experience in the arena, and making it very clear that the activities associations needed to manage those interactions. We shouldn't have kids going to play basketball and hearing monkey sounds when they're on the court. We shouldn't have kids walking to the bus wearing their helmets while people are throwing rocks at them. Use of expletives and pejoratives on the field and in the arena absolutely should not be tolerated. And so we had to mandate, we didn't mandate the exact language, but we told the association, the main association, you actually need to deal with this. Because the pathway for kids in sports and becoming an effective competitor, becoming a good sport, those are character lessons. And again, this is where, being bipartisan really came in. Like, there's a strong element of character in my Republican, like, they care about that. And then there's a strong sense of justice with my Democratic colleagues. So that's where we did that one. And then I wrote an even crazier bill that NCAA and Ducks didn't quite like as much. But I was pushing the envelope on the safety of our student athletes. My son said that he experienced one time a lady asked him for like an armband or something to autograph something. And he was, getting ready to do it, and she starts touching him, like just inappropriately. And this idea that our student athletes don't have boundaries was very concerning to me. The amount of alcohol that people were consuming became very apparent that it was a real barrier in our athletic contests. And then I'm also pretty sensitive to the fact that our kids are working very hard every day, and they were not receiving compensation in line with what the coaches were receiving. Mm-hmm. So my dream job would be as an advocate for NCAA players.
I love that.
Yeah.
I love that. We love having you as part of New Deal. We love the fact your ideas around the CHIPS Act dollars, I think, can be translated as these dollars flow to every state, and could make a huge difference and opportunity for lives. And so we're so grateful that you're part of New Deal and joining us today. I've wanted to have you on this podcast for a long time. Thank you for coming.
Thank you. It's been wonderful to be with you.
An Honorable Profession is a New Deal Leaders podcast. Thanks to the team at New Deal for producing this episode. We encourage you to bring honor to public service, and because we keep things honorable, no tax dollars are used in the making of this podcast.